She didn't try to seduce him. She didn't need to say anything profound. It was just the way she existed. She walked into the room, not looking for attention, not seeking love, and yet something inside him shifted. He didn't understand it. He couldn't name it, but for the first time in years, he felt something. Not desire, not excitement, something much deeper. It wasn't her eyes. It wasn't her voice. It was the way her silence matched something inside him he thought had died long ago. And just like that, he knew this wasn't just a woman. She was a mirror. Mirror that didn't flatter him, didn't lie to him, just reflected him. The part of him he buried so well that even he forgot it existed. Carl Jung once said, "We don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the qualities of our own soul we see reflected in them." If you're a man over 50, chances are you've done the right things most of your life. You showed up. You worked hard. You carried. Wait without complaining. Maybe you weren't the most romantic. Maybe you didn't always know what to say, but you were there. Every single day, and for a long time that felt like enough, because that's what you were taught, wasn't it? That real men don't break, that love is duty, that silence is strength, that feelings are distractions, and emotions are best left to fade quietly in the dark. So you became good at building a home, a life, a name. But somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, you stopped building a bridge back to yourself. You thought love meant protecting. You didn't know that sometimes love means unraveling, means letting someone see the parts of you never dared to face. You loved by doing. She longed for being, and the gap between those two, between what you gave and what she needed, grew slowly, like water dripping behind a wall, until one day the silence between you was louder than any argument. She stopped asking you to talk, stopped asking you to listen, stopped asking, period. She didn't stop loving you overnight. She stopped trying to find you in a room where you were physically present, but emotionally gone, and you didn't notice. Not because you didn't care, but because you didn't know how to notice. You thought keeping it together meant keeping it quiet, so you mistook stillness for peace, but what she felt was absence, the kind of absence that aches more when someone is sitting right beside you. She didn't want you to change the world. She just wanted you to sit next to her and see her, to say, "I feel it too," to whisper, "I'm scared sometimes," to admit, "I don't always know how to fix this." But no one ever taught you that kind of language. You knew how to read a room in business, how to survive in conflict, how to keep your family afloat when money ran low, but you never learned how to speak the language of closeness, how to be soft and strong, how to hold someone without fixing them, how to let yourself be held without shame. And then she came along, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind. She didn't demand, she didn't beg, she didn't try to change you. She just was, and in her presence, something inside you stirred, something you hadn't felt in years. Not desire, not fantasy, recognition, as if she was holding a mirror, and for the first time you saw a version of yourself you forgot existed, the one who used to dream, who used to feel, who used to believe that being loved didn't require being perfect. She didn't fall for your achievements. She fell for your silence and what it tried to hide, and somehow, without trying, she touched something no one else ever reached. Not your mind, not your body, but your soul. Her name was Claire. She wasn't loud, she wasn't wild. She didn't light up the room with a laugh or wear anything that screamed for attention. But when she walked in, he noticed. Not because of how she looked, but because of how he felt. There was something in the way she sat, comfortable in her own silence, something in the way she looked at him, without expectation, without agenda. It disarmed him, not like a threat, but like a home you forgot you once lived in. They didn't talk. No late-night confessions, no fiery intimacy. They had coffee a few times. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it wasn't poetic or profound, but God. It landed. One afternoon, as he rambled on about some work thing he didn't even care about, she said quietly, "Do you ever just miss yourself?" He froze. He hadn't thought about himself in years, not the one in the mirror, but the one underneath the routines, under the calendar, beneath the quiet. He laughed it off. She didn't push. She just smiled like she already knew, and that unsettled him more than any rejection ever could, because in her presence he felt seen, without having to explain, and that terrified him, because if she could see him so clearly... What had he been hiding from all this time? He started noticing little things, how she paused before she spoke, how she touched the table with her fingertips, like she was remembering something, how she asked questions and actually waited for the answer. She wasn't trying to get anywhere. She wasn't trying to win him, fix him, or fit into his life. She was just being, and that kind of beingness, it pulled him in deeper than anything loud ever had. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Not because they had some epic story, they didn't, but because she awakened a story in him that he had never told. Not even to himself, the story of a boy who used to write music in the garage, who used to sit under the stars and cry for no reason, who believed that being known was more important than being needed. He hadn't been that boy in decades. He became the provider, the planner, the fixer. He knew how to be strong, dependable, available, but only in ways that kept him at a safe distance. But she made him dangerous to himself. Because when she looked at him, she didn't see the version of him the world applauded. She saw the version that ached, and then, just as quietly as she entered, she left. No drama, no closure, no grand goodbye, just gone, and the world kept turning, work went on. No one even knew she had existed in his life. But inside him something had shifted, and he couldn't explain it. Because how do you tell someone that the woman you barely touched, barely kissed, barely knew, somehow reached the deepest part of you? How do you describe losing someone when what you lost wasn't her, but a version of you she reflected? You don't miss the texts, or the laughs, or even the conversations. You miss who you were becoming. When you were around her, because with her, you weren't hiding, you weren't performing, you were just there. And that was enough. And when she left, it wasn't her body that haunted you. It was the silence she left behind, the mirror she carried, and the question that never stopped echoing, do you ever miss yourself? Carl Jung once wrote, "A man's anima is the guide to his soul." And that's exactly what she was. She wasn't just a woman, she was a symbol. She wasn't just someone he liked or admired. She was a mirror, one that reflected a part of him he didn't even know he'd forgotten. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the unconscious feminine within every man. It's not a personality type or a romantic ideal. It's the emotional, intuitive, deeply feeling side of the masculine psyche, the side that most men are taught to silence, suppress, or shame. But that doesn't mean it disappears. It waits, and sometimes, without warning, a woman enters a man's life. And without trying, without knowing, she activates it, not with her words. Not with her beauty, but with her presence, the way she carries herself, the way she listens without judging, the way she exists unapologetically in her own truth. And suddenly something stirs inside him, something ancient, vulnerable, alive. He doesn't fall in love with her. He falls in love with what she awakens, the long-lost boy, the quiet poet, the soft heart he buried under decades of doing and providing and enduring. That's why the connection feels so intense, because it doesn't come from the mind, it comes from the unconscious, and the unconscious doesn't care about logic. It doesn't ask, does she make sense for me? It only asks, do I feel seen here? When a man falls for his anima projection, it's not really about her. It's about what she represents. She becomes the doorway to his depth, the reflection of what he's lost, or never dared to explore, and that's why losing her hurts more than it should, because in losing her, he's not just grieving a woman, he's grieving a version of himself that only came alive in her presence. He may not understand it. He might say, "We barely knew each other," or "It wasn't even serious." But deep down, something in his soul knows better. She didn't touch his body. She touched the frequency of who he really was, the part he keeps hidden, the part that longs, feels and breaks, the part that doesn't wear armor. And when that part is seen, really seen, even just once, it's nearly impossible to go back to sleep, because it's not about her being the one. It's about what he became while she was there, and that is the anima's power. She doesn't arrive to stay. She arrives to awaken, to remind him of the man beneath the mask. As Jung said, "We are not what we show. We are what we repress." And most men, they don't repress anger or ambition. They repress softness, longing, the desire to be held, not just needed. She wasn't a mistake. She was a messenger. And when she left, it wasn't punishment. It was a beginning. After she left, he told himself all the usual things. She wasn't right for me. It was just a passing connection. Maybe I imagined it. He tried to logic it away like men are taught to do. Tried to put her in a box labeled not important. Tried to replace the feeling with someone else. And for a while, it worked. On the surface, he dated. He laughed, he went back to normal, but late at night when the world grew quiet, something would pull at him. Not a memory, not a fantasy, but a frequency, a vibration that hadn't existed before she arrived. You see, it wasn't her skin he missed. It wasn't her voice or her body or her touch. It was something less tangible, but far more haunting. It was the way he felt in her presence. Not powerful, not desired, but open, and that terrified him, because it meant that what he truly craved wasn't romance, it was resonance, not sex, but something sacred, a space where he didn't have to perform, where he didn't have to lead or protect or fix. He kept chasing that space in other women, in distractions, in achievements, workouts, even spiritual routines. But nothing could replicate the stillness she had triggered in him, because she wasn't offering comfort, she was offering a mirror. And the truth is, he didn't know what to do with that kind of reflection, so he ran, not from her, from himself, from the part of him that felt too much, from the boy who never got to cry, from the man who longed to be held not for what he could provide, but for who he truly was beneath all that providing. It wasn't her absence that broke him. It was the echo of a version of himself that only existed in her presence, a version that laughed softer, listened more, and allowed silence to be enough. And when you've tasted that, when you've glimpsed who you could be, if only you weren't so afraid, no amount of distraction can fill that void. He didn't know it yet, but what he thought was heartbreak was really the start of awakening, because some losses aren't rejections, they're initiations. Eventually, he stopped blaming her, stopped trying to replace her, stopped running from the ache. He didn't numb it anymore. He let it sit, and in that silence, a deeper question began to rise, not about her, but about him. What was it about her that made me feel so alive? At first, he thought it was the mystery, the way she looked at him, the way she listened, but no, it wasn't any of that. It wasn't her presence. It was who he became in her presence. And that realization hit him like a wave. She didn't give him anything he didn't already carry. She simply reflected back what he had long abandoned, his softness, his wonder, his need to be seen, not for his strength, but for his soul. The truth was never about her. It was about what she illuminated. She was a mirror, not of what he wanted, but of who he could become, if he had the courage to stop hiding. That was the shift. That's when the real work began. He no longer looked outward. He turned inward, not to chase her down, but to meet the man she briefly awakened, the one who didn't armor up, who spoke without filtering, who loved without calculating what he might lose. It was never about holding on to her. It was about holding space for himself. Because the love he felt, the depth, the tenderness, the ache, wasn't hers to give or take. It was his all along. And now, for the first time, he wasn't trying to get her back. He was trying to get himself back. Have you ever met someone who didn't try to own? You didn't stay for long, but left behind something you still carry, not because of what you did together, but because of what they awakened in you. A feeling, a shift, a truth you couldn't unsee. Maybe it wasn't love in the way the world defines it, but it touched your soul in a way no one else ever had, and maybe you never told anyone. Maybe you couldn't find the words, but if that kind of experience lives in you, if someone came into your life, broke nothing, promised nothing, but somehow made you remember a part of yourself you'd forgotten, share it. Not for attention, but because your story might be the mirror someone else is waiting for. A man out there, maybe holding his breath, thinking he's the only one who felt that kind of invisible loss. Let him know he's not. Write in the comments, "She awakened something in me." Or just say what's real, because when we speak from the soul, we give other men permission to do the same. And in a world that often teaches men to stay silent, your voice might be the very thing that sets another man free.